It is Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. So you know what that means. We get to break down a matchup of the weekend here from the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders side of things from the local experts on the biggest stories. I'm Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, and I'm talking with your boy Q, host of the Locked On Raiders podcast, as we preview Sunday's matchup between two very storied teams. Or, Q, the story at the beginning of the season for these teams was high.
Right. Yes.
Now, it's an entirely different story. So, hey, my man, great to be able to break down another crossover episode with you, get some insight from a Raiders perspective. Broncos fans also get a little bit of perspective from you on how the team in Las Vegas is doing. Raiders fans get a little bit of perspective on how the Broncos are doing right now. And to be very honest with you, both teams are going through it at this point in time. So, Q, what is the biggest story this week with the Las Vegas Raiders?
I mean, the biggest storyline is when can you stop the bleeding? How do you stop the bleeding? I mean, they're on a 3-game losing streak right now. And as you mentioned, man, these are two teams that went into the season thinking that they were going to be competing in the AFC West with the Chiefs and the Chargers. And I fully believe that by the talent that both teams had acquired. And, we obviously had question marks about the head coaches. We had question marks about can this stand up? Can that stand up? Offensive lines. But there's no way that you would have told me going into week 11 the Raiders would have 2 wins on the season, right? I mean, it's just like, are you kidding me? Or it's just there's no way, right? And so, I mean, sitting there at 2-7, obviously already had their bye week. It's like, what in the world is going on? So, I mean, the biggest storyline is how is this thing going to come together? How, can these guys, like I said, stop the bleeding? And who is going to be players that this team moves forward with? Because now it's evaluation season. It's not, hey, let's make this playoff rush for the AFC West. It's just evaluation season. Who's great, who's not, who fits with the scheme, who fits what Coach McDaniels wants to do, and who doesn't. And unfortunately, it's the name of the game. I mean, the Raiders have 8 games left, counting Sunday's game against the Broncos, and it's not the storyline that anybody thought, especially myself, thought that we'd be talking about heading into this week against the Broncos for the second time. So, it's just stop the bleeding and who's going to step up and actually be players long-term for the Silver and Black. How about you? What's the storyline for you and the Broncos who've won, 3 games so far this year?
Yeah, I feel like everything you described summarizes the Broncos season as well. I mean, when we had our ultimate AFC West division crossover, we previewed the division. We all sat here saying, okay, hey, the AFC West right now on paper looks like it could be the best division in football in NFL history. Right. Man, it has been quite the opposite. And like with the Raiders, like you said, if at this point of the season, if anyone said that they'd be at 2 wins, we'd be like, no, you're crazy. Same thing with the Broncos. They'd be at 3 wins on the season. Russell Wilson, the offense, would have the worst offense in the National Football League. We're like, no, that's crazy. But that is the reality right now for this Broncos team. And Q, look, I think the stakes are high, right? Because right now, the Broncos and the Raiders, they're in the bottom 5 right now in the National Football League, especially from an optics standpoint. I think the bigger question is whoever wins this game on Sunday, the other team's bigger issues become even more magnified, right? Because the last Sunday, the Raiders, they lose to the Colts, and that was definitely a shock.
Saturday, right? I mean, there you go.
We saw Derek Carr. I mean, from Broncos' perspective, I saw Derek Carr's press conference. I saw what Maxx Crosby tweeted out. Things just don't seem to be going well in Vegas, but I can't sit here from a Broncos perspective and say anything because that's been the case for the Broncos too. They shoot themselves in their foot. The offense can't get anything going. They're the worst ranked offense in the National Football League, but they have the best defense from a scoring perspective too, Q. So nothing adds up when you look at the Broncos being a bottom tier team in a sense. It's all because of the offense, and it's due to a first-year head coach, Nathaniel Hackett. Everyone wants to place the blame on just Russell Wilson and just Coach Hackett, but it's a multitude of things. It's the offensive line. They could be going into Sunday's matchup with their 8th different starting O-line this season, with some practice squad guys being elevated. Certainly not ideal for anything. So I would say the same story that I think applies to the Raiders. Can the Broncos stop the bleeding? And that's been the $1 million question, $245 million question to be exact here. And there's just I don't think Broncos fans have any hope in this offense, and rightfully so. They haven't shown anything to give them, I'd say, the benefit of the doubt, right? I will say this weekend's game is going to be very critical, I think, from a Broncos standpoint, because if Nathaniel Hackett and the Broncos lose this game and the offense continues to struggle, we could see a coaching change happen afterward because not only have the Broncos lost 5 straight against the Raiders, you lose at home to Josh McDaniels and a struggling Raiders team. That right there in and of itself in the eyes of Broncos fans is not enough. And we may see fans leave the stadium early if they're trailing. It's not good right now in Broncos country.
Overtime, right? Saw that in overtime. What week was that against the Colts? That was that Thursday
week 5,
game,
right after the Raiders game. We're right after that week 4 Raiders game. And
Yep.
so it's just been a disappointing season. I feel for you, and I think you and I can both speak to each fan base here in a sense. Me speaking for the Broncos fan base, you speaking for the Raiders fan base. It's hard. It stinks when you're covering a losing team. It's tough, because we're there every day. We're at practice. We're seeing the guys. We talk to guys in the locker room. We talk to coaches. And ideally, we feel the frustration of the fans because they tune into our shows. We bring them access closer to, the team that they root for, that they're passionate about.
Right.
And we're not doing well. I mean, it's not fun for everybody, right? But I think that we're all going through it here. So maybe this will be like a therapy crossover episode here on Locked On Broncos. But Q, one thing I do want to throw to Broncos fans and Raiders fans' way is that we'll be diving into some of the key matchups of Sunday's game here coming up here in just a moment. We're going to highlight the Broncos offense and defense against the Raiders offense, Raiders defense, key matchups from key players as well. You'll get that on today's crossover episode, Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders. But today's episode of the show is brought to you by our good friends over there at Blue Nile. And whether you're looking to pop the question, you have a milestone to celebrate, or you want to let your love sparkle, Blue Nile can help make your celebrations even more memorable. As the original online jeweler, Blue Nile offers the largest selection of independently graded diamonds and pieces priced significantly below traditional retailers. Blue Nile has helped millions of couples create their perfect engagement ring. Their easy online tools let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style. And Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then help you handcraft her perfect one-of-a-kind engagement ring. If you're looking for a fine piece of jewelry to commemorate a special milestone but still having trouble choosing, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Shop stress-free with Blue Nile's 100% satisfaction guarantee, and all Blue Nile orders are insured and shipped for free in discreet packaging. They also offer overnight shipping if you're in a rush. Make your moment sparkle with Blue Nile. Go to BlueNile.com and use code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. That's BLUENILE.com. Code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. BlueNile.com. Code Locked On. And our good friends Tommy John. And getting stuck in Black Friday crowds does not sound fun. It sounds super uncomfortable. Shopping Tommy John's Black Friday sale from your couch, that is super duper comfortable. And when you give your loved ones Tommy John, they're that much more comfortable so they can do everything better. Shop Tommy John's Black Friday sale right now and give the gift of comfort to everyone on your list, including yourself, with brand new Tommy John underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. With over 18 million pairs sold, giving Tommy John has become a holiday tradition. 97% of women and men love getting a gift from Tommy John. That's why Tommy John doesn't have customers. They have fanatics. So celebrate softness season with the gift of Tommy John underwear, loungewear, or pajamas. Every gift is backed by Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear, or it's free guarantee. Shop Tommy John's Black Friday sale going on right now and get 30% off site-wide at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. 30% off everything now at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. All right, Q, as we continue this crossover Thursday episode previewing Sunday's matchup between the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders, two teams that have not met expectations that I think that the organizations have had, that the fan base has had, that players have had, and that us in the media have simply had for it as well. Because we talked about the AFC West being a gauntlet, and so far it has not been that. The Chiefs are still at the top of the division. Unfortunately, it looks like they're going to continue to roll that way. So now I think everything is what's next, right? Well, the only thing that you can do, Q, and I've been telling Broncos fans this, I've been telling football fans this, these guys aren't just going to say, okay, hey, we're not going to make the playoffs. We might as well just stop playing. That's not the mentality that players have. That's not the mentality the coaches have. They're playing for something. You mentioned it. They're playing for a job. They're auditioning. Everything's in evaluation season for these players on both teams. And that's what makes this matchup, I think, a little bit more interesting, right? So when we dive into key matchups for the Broncos and the Raiders' perspective, Q, what are some of the key matchups you have your eye on this week as the Broncos prepare to take on the Raiders, and the Raiders look to travel and play road spoils to the Broncos, where Raiders Nation seemingly travels well to Denver, Colorado?
Yeah, no, I think it goes back to the Raiders offense and the Broncos defense. And the Broncos defense, as you noted in segment number 1, is really good. But the Raiders have been the only team to put 30-plus points up on them, right, this season. They were able to do that. Now, they had a healthy Darren Waller and a healthy Hunter Renfrow at the time. They won't. Those guys are on IR. So I'm interested to see what Devontae Adams versus Pat Surtain looks like the second time around. Devontae Adams gave him a lot of credit in the locker room following the game at Allegiant Stadium and said, hey, I like him. He's nice. He brings it. He's a good little player. And we all know that he is. And that, again, was not a slight. That was just hey, that's a tip of the cap. He's a hell of a player, which he is. So I'm interested in seeing that. I want to see what the Raiders offense looks like against that really good Bronco defense. Can they, again, put up some points against them? And, without Bradley Chubb this time around, can the Raiders offensive line stack up a little bit better? I'm really interested to see the second time around. A lot of times there's always adjustments made by coaches and players. And so I'm interested to see what it looks like the second time. As you mentioned, the Raiders have done and been very successful against the Broncos, winners of 5 straight. So that's telling you that they've somewhat had the Broncos number. Can they continue to do that? And then on the other side of things, I'm really interested to see, can this, Raiders defense actually step up and continue to make the Broncos offense struggle, because that's something that the Broncos have done all season long. Can they actually step up and do that? Because as of late, especially, the Raiders defense has been really bad. Again, it's valuation season. So there was guys that were healthy scratches a week ago. Will those guys be available this week, or will it be a lot of young dudes again? If so, how do they, react to the Broncos offense? So most importantly, the Raiders defense isn't going to shut anybody out. So it's going to be, you got to win by scoring a lot of points as far as the Raiders go. I just want to see how they match up against that Broncos defense the second time around, in particular, Davante Adams and Pat Surtain.
Well, you mentioned it. Obviously, no Darren Waller for the Raiders, no Hunter Renfrow. Those guys have been placed on IR. That's a massive blow to the Raiders offense. But, for me, I always look at, okay, who are the next guys up? And you look at Mack Hollins, who I feel like has had a pretty underrated season for the Raiders this year. Davante Adams, we know how special he is as a player. You always have to account for Josh Jacobs, and the Broncos certainly have had their struggles against him. I'd say historically, throughout his tenure as a Las Vegas Raider, he's been their kryptonite. He really
always has
the Broncos were the get-right game for Josh Jacobs in that first matchup, and then he went on a run, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be very interesting to see how Denver plays Josh Jacobs, right? Because this past week they played Derrick Henry. They held him to 53 yards rushing, though they were a little unorthodox in the sense they came out with a 5-man defensive front, 3 linebackers, and 3 cover guys on the back end to really sell out to stop the run. Does that become the approach here? That I think is a huge question, because we see the Raiders come out in shotgun a lot of the time there. So I'm not sure we'll see that approach here, which means that the Broncos are going to have to be very disciplined in their internal gaps there, essentially, because in that first matchup, a lot of arm tackling, a lot of trying to hit Josh Jacobs and trying to rip the ball out rather than just holding him, wrapping him up, and allowing other guys to come in. We'll see if they learn from that. But outside of that, I'm also looking at another guy, the tight end position. Not sure if he's injured or not. You'll probably be able to provide a little bit more update on him. Obviously, with Darren Waller's injury, I imagine it means we're going to see a little bit more Foster Moreau, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And he's been a bigger factor, right? And he has to. And this is a year that is a contract year for him. And he's done pretty good. Now, he's not Darren Waller, but he's done pretty good, right? And he finds a way to get open. He seems like a guy that Derek Carr trusts to be a outlet guy and get the rock to, pretty effectively. So, yeah, I definitely believe that you'll see a heavy dose of Foster. You'll see a heavy dose of Josh, especially if he's rolling early. And, again, a heavy dose of Davante Adams. Again, with Renfrow being out, Waller being out, it's got to be, in my opinion, the Adams and Jacobs show. And then everyone else is kind of a branch off of that. As you mentioned, Hollins and then Foster. And so, bottom line, it comes back to the Raiders in that offensive line. If they can protect Derek Carr, if they can protect Derek Carr, he can have a good day, doing what he does. Either throwing the ball to Foster or Davante, even sprinkling the Mack Hollins in there, or Josh Jacobs could run. But that offensive line has got to be pretty strong, and they've struggled a little bit as of late. So that's going to be interesting. But I love the way that you brought up the way that the Broncos defended Derrick Henry, and if they have that kind of approach, that's something I think it's a really good nugget to pay attention to see if the Raiders do face that kind of defense from the Broncos, or if they switch things up, because as you mentioned, the Raiders are in shotgun so much.
Well, and I think a big key to that, right, especially with Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow being out, can the Broncos afford to have 3 coverage guys on the field and really sell out against the run? I think that's going to be an interesting thing. We'll see how it works. Denver is going to be without their top nickel cornerback, though. K'Wan Williams did suffer a knee injury, had arthroscopic knee surgery, will be out at least 4 weeks. So that's a massive blow for the Broncos on the defensive side of the ball. They will get Justin Simmons back here this week. He missed Sunday's game against the Tennessee Titans. The matchup that really worries me, Q, in this game, it's the Raiders' defense against the Broncos' offense, right? Because even if the Raiders' defense is going through their struggles, they're better than what the Broncos' offense can put out there on the field. Denver will be without right tackle Billy Turner in this matchup. More than likely, it's going to be Quinn Bailey, who's a practice squad offensive tackle at this point in time for them. And then at center, Graham Glasgow, he got injured in the Tennessee Titans game. He's day-to-day. His status is potentially in question, which then if he's unable to go, that means that you're going to have rookie center Luke Wattenberg stepping in there with Russell Wilson. And when he had to step in Sunday's game after Glasgow went out with an injury, he struggled massively against the Tennessee Titans. There's still Chandler Jones. There is still, when you look at it on the outside there's still Maxx Crosby, who's just an absolute force and had 2 sacks against the Broncos in that first matchup. Nate Hobbs had the 3rd sack off the edge against Russell Wilson. I do not have any confidence that the Broncos offense can maintain against this Raiders defense. As much as the Raiders defense has struggled, the Broncos offense is simply not that good. And they could be without Jerry Jeudy as well, which is also another big impact there. So, Q, I mean, I think from on a paper standpoint, everything is just like, is this really a game that is going to be captivating? Is it going to be an entertaining game? I don't know if we can answer that with certainty, but then again, we've seen stranger things happen in the National Football League. So that is a big question here for both teams. And if you're a Broncos fan watching this, if you're a Raiders fan watching this crossover episode here on the Lockdown Podcast Network, if you're watching on these respective YouTube channels, let us know in the comment section down below, which matchups are you looking forward to seeing in the Broncos-Raiders matchup this Sunday in Power Field at Mile High, 2:05 p.m. Mountain Time, kickoff 1:05 p.m. Pacific Time for those of you in Las Vegas. One of the things we're going to talk about on today's crossover episode as well is, what do the Raiders have to do to win? What do the Broncos have to do to come away victorious in Sunday's game? You'll get that on today's crossover episode. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode of the show. It's our good friends over there at betonline.net. And betonline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league that's out there, from football to basketball to soccer and even esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those as well at betonline. Also, we're always the fastest and the easiest way to get your betting fix. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we continue on this crossover Thursday episode, Locked On Raiders and Locked On Broncos, we're breaking down all the action, whether it be the biggest story for each team, as we've recapped the Broncos and the Raiders have not lived up to expectations that people have hoped for this season in Broncos country and Raiders nation. We've also talked about some of the key matchups. How can the Broncos defense take advantage of the Raiders without Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow? They still have to count for Mac Hollins, Josh Jacobs, Devontae Adams. Can the Broncos offense starve off a little bit of Maxx Crosby and the aggressive Raiders defense we expect to see? We've recapped that to this point. Now, Q, I think we just got to get into the conversation. If the Las Vegas Raiders are going to come to Denver on Sunday and leave with a win to get their 3rd win of the season, a much-needed win here, I think, for either team, what do they have to do in order to do that?
Well, they're going to have to start fast. They really are. And that's something that they've been struggling with. They've been shooting themselves in the foot. You mentioned that before. Too many penalties, too many pre-snap penalties, too many it feels like wasted downs to me, like passes where guys are running the wrong route and they just fall harmlessly to the ground, which is great. You don't want to intercept it, but it just seems like there's a lot of wasted motion going on with the Raiders early in the game. And so they're not really clicking. And so unfortunately for them, they're a lot of times trying to find their way back into a game, like they got down 10-0 to the Colts on Sunday. And I mean, honestly, you shouldn't have got down 10-0 to a team that had as much disarray and as much question marks and dysfunction going on like the Colts did, but they did. And a lot of it was because they received the ball first and they couldn't get going. And so finally they got going, but it just seems like it's never consistent. They've got to be able to play consistent ball, whether that's running the rock, whether that's passing the rock. I don't care which way you go heavy. I mean, I really don't. I thought at one point, Cody, in the season, especially when Josh Jacobs had his breakout game against the Broncos earlier in the season, I thought, okay, there's the identity of the team. They're going to be a run-heavy team, and everything's going to build off of that. And then they ran the rock really well, 3 games in a row. And then really it's been good, but it hasn't been great. It's been decent. It's been okay. It hasn't just been, okay, that's definitely their identity. So I don't care how they get it done. I don't really care how they make the sausage. What has to happen is they have to be able to consistently do it. And that has been their biggest problem. And so I don't know who's going to be available as far as if there's going to be some guys, maybe they're trotting out some younger dudes, again, to try to evaluate these cats. I don't know if everybody on the offensive line is going to be able to go. And maybe Josh Jacobs is going to get a lot of carries, and then they'll bring in Zamir White, who is the rookie out of Georgia. Maybe he's going to get some burn. I'm not too sure exactly how they put this whole thing together. Again, I call it evaluation season where they're at right now for both teams. But I know they want to win the game. They want to defeat Nathaniel Hackett and the Broncos and, sweep them again and just, kind of feel really good about that happening against the AFC West division opponent. But honestly, man, they just have to find consistency. That is the biggest thing. It really doesn't matter what they put together. They just got to look like they're confident in what they're doing. They haven't looked confident lately, and they haven't been consistent. So as far as I'm concerned, just go out and play consistent ball. If you're going to win that game, it's got to be a 4-quarter game. It can't be a half a game. It can't be 1 quarter. It can't be 3 quarters. It's got to be 4 quarters. They haven't done that really too much all season, and that's why they only have 2 wins so far this year. How about you? What are you looking for the Broncos to do to go out there and get a dub on Sunday?
Once again, I feel like everything you said about the Raiders, I can apply to Denver, right? They've never been able, I'd say defensively, it's been their strong suit, right? They've been able to maintain, but the defense can only be on the field for so long before the war of attrition kind of sets in. And we saw that against the Raiders. Denver simply was on the field too much. I mean, to the point they were on the field the entire third quarters. The Broncos only had 3 plays for minus, I think, actually not minus, but they had 3 plays for 18 yards again in that first matchup in week 4. And I don't think that's sustainable, right? So if the Broncos defense is able to do what they've kind of been able to do and avoid giving up the big play, they gave up a 63-yard flea flicker this past Sunday against the Tennessee Titans. Really, that was the only big play they allowed on the offensive side of the ball from an opposing offense. I'm not worried about Denver's defense. It's all going to boil down to this. The offense has to win this game plain and simple, Q. And that's a tough ask. I feel like it's asking something that's impossible at this point. The Broncos have been unable to really surpass a point totalage, really past, I would say, 16 points since that Las Vegas Raiders game there, that first matchup that they had. From that point, it's been all downhill for the Broncos offensively. And I think one of the bigger keys, if Denver's able to score 24 points in this game, which looking at all the realms of adversity with the offensive line, looking at the potential injuries to Jerry Jeudy, whether or not he's going to play or not, Nathaniel Hackett abandoning the run and really just saying, hey, we're going to be a passing team, doesn't look very good here. But if somehow the Broncos are able to capitalize in some way, shape, or form and put up points on the offensive side of the ball, I have confidence that they can win. But it's to the point now where even myself, being there and seeing practice every day, actions speak louder than words, right? And we have to see the Broncos offense carry it over at some point. I will say this past week against Tennessee, I've never seen Russell Wilson that frustrated. It looked like frustration was kind of creeping in his post-game press conference. We actually saw some pissed off Russell Wilson, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing for some other teams. But right now, the Broncos don't have, I think, the optics and everything in their favor to say that with confidence that they can win this game on Sunday, because really they're going to go as far as the offense goes. The defense can only do so much. And Q, the Broncos could win on defense if the defense is able to score 14 points a game. I mean, that might be the only way to do it. And I'm not sure if that's going to be realistic to ask of a team at this situation. So obviously disappointing seasons for both teams, for both fan bases, who I'm sure that you and I have both heard countless realms of frustration. And, it's crazy, but one thing is for certain, that we cover these teams, your team every day. Q covers the Raiders every single day, whether they're winning, whether they're losing. He brings you as close as he can to the team. Same thing here on the Locked On Broncos side with myself and Sarah Bettinger. We hope that this is a good football game, just from an optic standpoint for both teams. And you know what? May the best team win. Who knows how it's going to go, but certainly it is not the Broncos or the Raiders' time in the AFC West this season. I think that is one thing that we've all made very, very clear.
Sure, no doubt.
Broncos country, Raiders Nation, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune in and listen to this Locked On Podcast Network crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Raiders and Locked On Broncos on your favorite audio podcasting platforms, or whether you're watching on YouTube. We'll be back. We'll obviously have you covered every step of the way. Keys to victory on the next episode of these shows, respectively. And obviously, we'll have the post-game shows for you live on your favorite podcasting provider and YouTube as well. Until next time, Q, I know the next time we get a crossover, it's going to be next year, which makes me bummed out. We're going to have to find a way to do some more work together here in the offseason, my man.
Absolutely. No doubt. It's always good to get together with you, man, talk a little Broncos and Raiders, and maybe we'll get some postseason action with AFC West. Maybe we'll get put on assignment or something so we can hook up and do something. We'll figure something out. But, yeah, man, it's always great to catch up with you. I appreciate you, and appreciate Broncos country as well for showing love. And I know Raider Nation has a lot of love for you as well. So there you go.
Here we go. All right. Well, that's it. We'll have all the coverage here on the Locked On Podcast Network after the game on Sunday.